Welcome to everybody who's joined this morning. I am Lisa Hilder. I'm a trustee for Preston Road Women's Centre in Hull, and we've been generating income through our work with property and through our own family law firm for a number of years now. The session today, I'm hoping, will be as interactive as possible. We've got quite a few women on the call, so as Anna said, if you wanted to pop any questions in the chat, they'll be fielded, and I'm happy to take questions as we go along. So as they occur to you, please don't be shy. As I say, I'd like it to be as interactive as possible. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have come away at least with a broader awareness of social investment and social enterprise, and perhaps with a few ideas of how this might apply to you and to your organisation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and I'm going to ask people to hopefully, there we go, confirm that they can see that just by popping yes in the chat.
Just say, Lisa, I can see it. That's great. Thank you.
Right. Okie dokie. So I'll get started. As I say, I'll talk through the slides. I'll allow some time for question and answers at various points throughout the presentation, but please don't be shy. Okay, so we're now Preston Road Women's Centre. We're based in Hull. The Preston Road bit refers to Preston Road Estate. So our beautiful Women's Centre is slap bang in the middle of an inner city council estate that serves several thousand families, and also operates across the city of Hull. And as you can see, the strapline is that we're about creating sustainable solutions for women and children in Hull. We are a women-only space. We offer women-only services, and that's one of the bedrocks from which we operate. So let's just move that down. Go. Now then, you'll have seen the little animation that came out with the newsletter of an exhausted woman running around a hamster wheel, and I'm guessing that's a pretty familiar for a number of people, and is indeed the situation that we were in for the first 10 to 12 years of our operation. We began in the year 2000 as part of a New Deal for Communities regeneration programme, and it started off as a project on the estate and grew into a charitable company limited by guarantee, offering a range of services. And for the first 10 years, all of those services were funded through grants and contracts, which meant that we were running around this hamster wheel. And at the time, I was working as a paid worker in the Women's Centre, and it was my responsibility to generate the income through grants and contracts. And I did feel like I was running around this hamster wheel constantly. It's exhausting, it's demoralizing. You feel like you don't have much control over life. And it's something that we'd all like to step off and actually focus on what's best for women. So I'm going to assume that this is a situation that is familiar to you, and we'll start to look at during the session at how we can move away from that. So I'm going to talk to you about Preston Road Women's Centre. It's a multi-purpose women's centre offering a range of specialist services, more of that in a minute. I'm going to talk about the value of and the utilisation of, so how can we and how can you use, and similarly, how could you think about using social enterprise models in your service delivery, and how that all contributes towards financial sustainability for your organisation. And there'll be an extended time for questions and answers and discussion at the end. But as I've said, if you want to ask questions as we go along, that's absolutely fine. So Preston Road Women's Centre, which is also known as Purple House, and you'll see why in a minute, has been operating for 20 years for women and children in Hull. And you can see our web address there if you want to look us up as we go along. There's just a few snaps on that page of the sorts of activities that women and children have participated in and continue to participate in as part of what we deliver. And I'm sure again that a lot of that will look familiar to you and to your organisations. One of the things that I really value about Preston Road Women's Centre is that we are there for women and kids of all ages. So our nursery takes babies from 6 weeks, and our eldest participants are in their 90s. And we have every age and every conceivable background of women and girls throughout the ages. So it really is a lively place to be, particularly I have to say for the older women. They have a craft group twice a week, which I can only really describe as a semi-controlled riot, where they have a great time enjoying themselves and setting the world to rights. So again, just a little flavour of some of the activities that we've delivered as part of our 20-year history. And this slide tells you a little bit about our journey. We started in 1999, just before the regeneration programme came into being. And we talk about, or we have experienced a whole range of different phases of our development and delivery. So when we began as part of the regeneration programme, we literally were operating with myself and half a dozen volunteers out of a classroom in the local primary school. So it was very small. The powers that be at the time thought, oh well, we'll give the women a little classroom and they can do sewing a couple of times a week, and that'll keep them quiet and keep them happy. Well, little did they know, we set about listening to women on the estate and understanding what they wanted, what they needed, and what they felt they wanted to do together. And from that has grown a whole range of services. So we began with a young women's project. We started delivering training. We moved into our first premises in 2002. We then started to work with other local women's projects and services as part of a women's forum. In 2004, we registered as a company and a charity, and that was the beginning of our amicable divorce from the regeneration programme. And from there, we never really looked back. We opened our nursery full-time in 2005. We extended the premises because there were so many women that came to use our lovely purple house, we couldn't literally fit them in. And in 2007, which was a key milestone, we bought our first 3 properties to house women and kids fleeing violence and abuse. And once we had worked out how to do that effectively, we wanted to grow that service provision, and that's what we've done. We moved on, started to increase our housing stock. We expanded our domestic abuse support team. In 2013, we registered our trading arm as a housing association, which helped us tremendously in terms of maximising the rental income and being attractive to social investors. Continued to grow the number of properties that we had. We did some work with the Empty Homes National Programme, more of which later. We have a very active training programme. We've registered as a training delivery centre. In 2016, we launched our own family law firm, Affordable Justice, and we began work on planning for our new women's centre. We wanted to design something for women, by women, which met the needs of women. And we spent an awful long time with the architect thinking about what we wanted the building to look like, how we wanted the spaces to interact. And in 2018, we opened what we think is the UK's first purpose-built women's centre. We started to really expand our social investment work, and by 2020, we had 42 staff, 35 volunteers, and we had raised £20 million over those 20 years to support women and kids in the local area and those that were fleeing violence and abuse. So from one room and 6 or 7 women, we've grown into a group of companies delivering a range of services for women. And this beautiful graphic is done by a very talented woman called Cara, who is incredibly skilled at listening to ideas, thoughts, facts, and rendering them in graphic form so that it's a really accessible way to explain what we do and how we do it. So I'll just pause there for a moment and see if there's any questions thus far. Has anything popped up in the chat, Rosa? No, nothing so far. People are still feeling a little bit shy. That's quite all right.
Only to say that there's somebody saying this is awesome and inspiring and very impressive. So there are people out there hearing what you're saying.
Very good. Okay, so what do we actually do then? The services that we deliver from our Purple House. As I've mentioned, there's a whole range of services, and we describe it as our integrated service model. And it's designed to support women from the point of crisis intervention right through to recovery. So all of these services play a part in supporting women, enabling women, empowering women, and helping them to move on from typically some kind of life trauma or a difficult situation, and to achieve their full potential. So we have a specialist domestic abuse support service, as I imagine a number of your organisations do. And currently that's funded partly through a local authority contract, one post through Comic Relief, and in the last year or so, some emergency COVID-19 money. It's also part funded through our unrestricted income. So it's a whole blend of finance. And that service does what I imagine a number of you are familiar with, which is tailored support for women either still living in or having left a domestic abusive situation. And we work very much around promoting safety, planning for safety, and enabling women to move on positively from that experience. We have a safe dispersed accommodation. So I know this might be stating the obvious, but clearly part of recovery from an abusive relationship is having a safe place to live. And we currently have 217 properties across the city of Hull of all sizes, 1 beds to 5 beds, mostly 2s and 3s, which offer safe, good quality housing and ongoing support for women to live independently and manage their tenancies with us. And this includes offering accommodation to women with no recourse to public funds. So we have intensive support for women in those circumstances and a mechanism through which we can fund the accommodation that they need. And this is one of the pillars of our financial sustainability. I've mentioned affordable justice. One of the things that happened in 2013 was something called LASPO, which essentially was the welfare reform associated with legal aid, which made it incredibly difficult for most women to access legal aid in relation to domestic violence and abuse. We knew this was coming, we knew it was going to be awful, and we wanted to do something about it. So we looked at a variety of different options in terms of civil law remedies. And after a lot of thought and development, we landed on a model of running our own family law firm, which is separately constituted. It's registered with the Solicitors Registration Authority, and it's a registered charity. And effectively, it's a not-for-profit family law firm that offers specialist family law advice to women in difficult circumstances around things like child proceedings, non-molestation orders, divorce, separation, and so on. And that's one of our social enterprises. Again, more of that later. But as you might imagine, as a result of LASPO, the demand for that service is significant. We have a nursery on site for 0s to 5s, and we have some parents who pay fees. That's a small number, but it's funded through a local authority contract largely for either the 15-hour or the 30-hour placements that under 5s are entitled to. And it's also part funded through our unrestricted income into the Women's Centre, and it supports things like our accredited training programme. So if women come on courses, they get free childcare to enable them to do that. And women who come to use our services can also access the nursery for free. We think that typically women have very adult conversations that they need to have with our support workers, and it's not really appropriate for little ears. So they're well taken care of in our registered nursery, and they actually really enjoy it. So our nursery is a key part of that integrated service model, reducing barriers for women to access services and activities. I mentioned the accredited training. We're a registered learning centre with the National Open College Network, so women who come on our courses get certificates for their achievements in learning. We have a fully set up training suite in the Women's Centre. At the moment, all our training's online, but that's been accessed quite a bit as well by women at home. So that's a little bit later down the recovery journey, but again, something that really contributes towards enabling women to achieve their full potential. We've got a volunteering programme, which for many years was funded through different sources. I'm sure somebody out there will remember opportunities for volunteering that was around through the Department of Health. So it's been funded a couple of times through Ops for Vols, also through the Big Lottery Fund for a number of years. But that funding came to an end more than a year ago. But we didn't have to roll back at all on our volunteering programme because the funding was picked up through our unrestricted funding. And that's really one of the massive benefits of being able to control our own money, is that we can apply it to the areas where we think there's greatest need or where we're unable to access ongoing grant funding. And our volunteers are a key part of making the Women's Centre run, and it's also part of the recovery journey for women after crisis. We have a charity shop on site, which is run entirely by our volunteers, does what it says on the tin. Doesn't make an awful lot of money, but what it does do is recycle good quality second-hand goods onto the estate. So it provides a service, provides a really good volunteering opportunity, and it does provide some income into the Women's Centre. And we took a decision a couple of years ago that all the income from the charity shop is applied to what we call our Domestic Violence Emergency Fund, which pays for some of the immediate needs that women might have if they've had to up sticks and leave an abusive relationship. Anything from crockery to microwaves to carpets on the stairs, whatever it might be, we can fund that out of the income from the charity shop. And last but not least, we've got a young women's participation and empowerment project that's funded through Children in Need currently, but again will soon be funded out of our unrestricted income. And that is a mixture of a girls' youth club, which runs 2 nights a week when we're able to do that, and one-to-one work with young women who have either grown up in abusive households or who in adolescence might be getting into their own abusive relationships. So we do one-to-one work and advocacy around support and safety planning and recovery for young women. So again, I'll take a little pause there and see if there's any questions that have come up thus far.
Lisa, there's loads.
Okay, well, crack on.
And I should say that there's just a lot of women saying this is really inspiring, and I feel like people are feeling uplifted by hearing your stories, so thank you. So I've tried to kind of group the questions into topics. It may be that some of these are covered later on in your presentation, but I'll let you decide whether you want to address them now or later. So there's quite a few questions around training. A couple of women asking whether you charge for training, and also a couple asking about the accreditation of courses. So a couple of women saying that they run courses and would love to get them accredited, but not sure where to go, and that there are lots of different options for where to accredit courses, and they're not sure where to go first. So that's one area of questions. Do you want me to leave you with that or move on to all the others?
I'll take those questions,
okay,
and we'll move on to the next topic. So in terms of training, we don't charge our service users for training at all. It's free at point of delivery. And I think I mentioned that women can also access the nursery to support them with that. It's funded through our unrestricted income. We have had contracts in the past for delivering training. I'm sure people remember the European Social Fund, which drove us to the brink, I think, in terms of administrative requirements. So, but now it's funded separately. In terms of an accrediting body, I'd be really happy to have a separate discussion with women who are particularly interested in that. We go through the National Open College Network, but we have used an organisation called CERTA previously. There are lots of options out there. What we think is that the National Open College Network has a good understanding of the needs of our learners, and as such is a slightly less traditional training accrediting body, and some of the more traditional ones tend to rely on things like exams and pressurized tests, which don't necessarily suit the women who come to learn with us. But I think it's quite a long conversation to talk through the pros and cons of different accrediting bodies. So wouldn't necessarily get into that in detail now. What are the just remind me, Anna, what are the other areas to cover in training?
I think you've answered the questions around training. There's a couple of people saying, is there a possibility of kind of further conversation about accreditation afterwards?
Of course.
So maybe at the end we'll kind of work out how we field those. There's lots of questions around the early fundraising. So I think probably lots of women looking at this thinking, wow, we'd love to do that over the next 20 years. So how did you start? So a couple of people just asking very generally, can you tell us more about your early fundraising strategy? But obviously you were working in quite a different context 20 years ago. And then specifically, how did you get the money to buy the first 3 houses in 2007? And also someone asking, how do the houses provide income, especially if they're housing women with no recourse to public funds or women on low incomes?
All good questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of the early fundraising strategy, we focused very much on matching grant funds to the sorts of services that we wanted to offer. And aside from affordable justice, the service delivery looked quite similar at that point in time. We had some money to do work specifically around teenage pregnancy and sexual health in some of the early years. It was quite fashionable in the early noughties to focus on that area of work. So we had some grant funding, and then we had some what was then PCT, Primary Care Trust health funding to do that. But essentially the fundraising strategy was about matching relevant grants to relevant services to fund the direct service delivery, but then also to contribute towards the core costs of running the organisation. And that's a fairly standard model that I'm sure lots of women will be familiar with. It's hard to make it work because you're always spinning plates and always thinking about, well, how are we going to fund the nursery, or how are we going to fund the training, how are we going to fund the volunteering for the next 3 years, or whatever it might be. But I think particularly for women's services, grants and a little bit in terms of contracts was the way to go, and probably remains the way to go, simply because domestic abuse and women's issues in general are not popular causes for more public donations or generating income through appealing to people's better nature. My experience has been that although generally speaking nobody agrees with domestic abuse, it's a very long journey from expressing that view to putting their hand in their pocket and making a donation to a charity that focuses on tackling domestic abuse. So grants and contracts was largely our fundraising strategy for a long time. As part of that, though, running around the hamster wheel was exhausting. And I think we recognised a long time ago that the writing was on the wall, largely, for that way of working. And it was always going to be a process that was going to get harder and harder. And therefore, we wanted to look at different ways of generating income. In terms of the property work and where that came from, it came from, and I remember it distinctly, a Friday afternoon conversation with the domestic abuse workers who had received a lot of inappropriate referrals, as tended to get on a Friday afternoon, from statutory agencies saying, this woman needs sorting. It's now 3 o'clock on a Friday. She needs somewhere to live by 5 o'clock. Can you help? And that's incredibly burdensome for the staff members, obviously an awful situation for the women, but to have that pressure and to know that trying to find suitable accommodation for a woman in a dangerous situation at short notice is, you know, really, really challenging. And it basically came from that conversation, which said, wouldn't it be great if we had our own properties through which we could house women? That's where the idea sprung up. In terms of our first money to do that, there was something that was available at the time called what I now know to be blended finance, which is part grant and part loan, that was available through an organisation called Future Builders England. That organisation transformed into the social investment business, which still offers social investment loan funds for various different social enterprise activities, including property work. But we got our first investment from Future Builders England and bought our first 3 properties in 2007, but it was actually part of acquiring 10 properties, which we nicely achieved halfway through 2008. And that first investment was £720,000, which was £500,000 of loan and 220,000 in both capital and revenue grant that enabled us to put down the deposits on the properties and also to fund a worker who sourced those properties and got them ready for tenancy. So that was the beginning, and we've grown from there in terms of our property work, bolting on different bits of capital grant and different forms of loan investment. And I'll talk through a more detailed timeline of that later in the presentation. Have I covered everything in terms of the fundraising questions?
I think people have lots more questions, but I think probably when you're talking in more detail about how you purchase the properties and what that looked like, probably those questions might be answered.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions about the skills and expertise that your organisation has needed to get this off the ground. So one person asking about whether right at the beginning you had a fundraiser and whether that was a volunteer or a paid person. And then a couple of women also asking about your trustees and have you found that it's useful to have someone with a business background sitting on your trustee panel? You know, where do all these amazing ideas come from?
Okay, sorry, there was one question as well, I remember, about women with no recourse and how do we fund that?
Yes, you're right.
We're able to do that now because we have so many properties and we can generate enough income to provide a financial cushion for the rent that would be charged to women with no recourse. So whilst they are applying for the domestic violence concession, they're not entitled to claim for rent, but we can fund that through our unrestricted income to enable her, and we support her, to get the domestic violence concession and move into being able to claim public funds. So that's in a nutshell how we fund that. In terms of the skills and expertise, I had a little smile there because fundraising was carried out as part of what was then my role as centre coordinator. So juggling it alongside the, operational issues of the day, whatever that might be, everything from we need to send somebody to the shop for a couple of pints of milk to, there's a wasp nest in the roof, what do we do with that? To, right, I need to sit down and complete a funding application. So we didn't have a dedicated fundraiser. And it was very hard, very challenging to fit it all in amongst the day-to-day demands. In terms of our trustee board, we were all blissfully ignorant of property at the beginning. We didn't have anyone with a business background, and largely I would say we still don't have anybody with a business background on our trustee boards, and I'll talk about our legal structure in a bit. We have learnt as we've gone along. So we have empowered ourselves. We've made mistakes, undoubtedly, but we've learnt from them, fixed them, and moved on. And what I particularly like about that model is that it has demystified the process. So we haven't felt like we couldn't do it because we didn't have the right women. We are the right women, and I guarantee you are the right women to do this, because anybody can acquire knowledge. That's a process, and you learn as you go along. So I think it's largely about having the confidence and the courage of your convictions that this is the right thing to do. And I'm not suggesting it's easy. It isn't easy. It's a lot of hard work, but nobody on this call is shy of hard work. I'm convinced of that. So you can do it without feeling like you've got to have everything perfect or you've got to have a board of experts before you get into it.
Lisa, there are lots of people saying this is so inspiring, and yeah, I think people are really pleased to hear you say that they're the right people to be doing this. There are a couple of other questions. I'm really conscious we're probably not going to address every single one. So if there are specific questions that we don't manage to answer, everyone who's listening, please do just kind of remind us at the end. There are some questions about the affordable justice arm and how that generates income, but I'm thinking you're going to come on to that.
I will do, yeah. So yeah, for those women who do have questions, some of them will be answered by later slides, but if there is anything that isn't, then we'll pick that up through the questions process. That's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. There was one about private property, which I thought was worth mentioning now. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that someone had made a comment about the cost of housing in different parts of the UK. And I think they're based in Devon, where I imagine housing is much more expensive than it is in Hull.
Sure.
And I guess maybe when we talk more about the social investment side of things, it's worth just thinking about the different contexts that people are working in. And then also someone talking about the kind of the private rental angle. So I'm going to read out the question, and it might be that it's relevant now, or it might be that it comes up later. Someone said, one of our directors has a private rental property. Is that something we could turn into an office building to hold some of our classes and support meetings?
Yeah, that's quite a specific question. What I would suggest is that if you think the space is appropriate, then I mean, I wouldn't try and mix tenants with office space. That doesn't feel to me to be quite the right mix. But if it's simply about using that particular property differently and charging a rent, then that's a business arrangement that the director and the organisation would need to talk through and think about what is the rent that's going to be charged, how will that be funded, etc., etc. A sort of a mini business model, really.
And I should say that there's a few people kind of saying, well, can we come and visit you once COVID restrictions allow?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think people are really feeling that the approachability of the Women's Centre, obviously you're representing the Women's Centre for us today, and feeling that it still feels really approachable, even though the size of your work is, seems really large now. So a few people asking how it's been maintaining the quality and approachability of what you do as the organisation's grown. Again, if now's not the time to comment on that, fine. But
no, I think that's a really good question, because we have grown. And we started off with one member of staff, which was me, and we now have 50 women on payroll. So it's a big operation. But one of the things that we're really, really clear about is that we want to maintain that close relationship to the women who walk through the door. So any of the activities or the services that we provide have come from either those women saying, actually, I really need this, or our staff saying, I was working with a woman and this was a gap in what we could offer. So it's always generated through need and wish from the women that we work with. And we work really hard to make the physical environment that we operate in as welcoming and as suitable as possible. And that was one of the absolute joys of being able to design our Women's Centre literally from the ground up. Indeed, actually from the piling up. We had to put 12 metres of piling down, which was a whole learning experience. But being able to design it around the needs of the women who use the centre, and we still get loads of women from the estate who drop in for a cup of tea, for a chat, maybe to access one of the sessions, but often to use our charity shop. And they use the conversation in the charity shop with the volunteer to gently check us out and work out whether either they can volunteer themselves or whether there's a service that they might be interested in using. So our charity shop is a means to engage women in a way that's non-threatening and means that they can get involved at their own pace. There was something else there that you mentioned, Anna, that I think might be worth. It was something else to do with property. Was it privately rent? Oh, the different cost of property in different areas of the country. We're working with a range of different organisations up and down the country. in some of the most expensive parts of the UK, and absolutely the cost of a 2-bedroom property in Devon or in Kent, for example, where we're working with a particular organisation, is very different to the cost of a 2-bedroom property in Hull. But making it work financially is not only about the capital cost and purchase price of a particular property, it's about the amount of loan that you need to help finance that, and the different levels of rent that are chargeable in different areas of the country. So whilst it's cheaper to buy property in Hull, the rental levels that we have are comparatively low when you look at different areas of the country. And in the more expensive parts of the country, the rental levels are higher. So it's all about the financial relationship and ratio between what you can draw in and what you need to pay out in terms of, for example, loan repayments. So please don't assume that if you're living in an area where property is more expensive, that a property model won't work. You need to do that number crunching to check out and test out whether it's feasible or not. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing with different organisations at the moment. So I'm going to move on to some different slides now. Again, I think we just check in on the time. Yes, we ought to motor on a bit, but we will get round to answering everybody's question. If not on this session, then in perhaps a follow-up session, or I'm quite happy to do a Q&A answer sheet, something like that, if there are any that we need to mop up. So I talked about the Women's Centre. This is where it all happens. First purpose-built Women's Centre in the UK. Twice the space that we had before to deliver services, although we've rapidly grown into that space. It's environmentally sustainable. You can probably see the solar panels on the roof there. It doesn't wobble. Our first property was a prefab, and it was well beyond end of life. It was put up after the Second World War with a anticipated lifespan of 30 years. So it was about 40 or 50 years beyond the end of its life. And every time the number 3 bus went past, the whole building rattled. So it was quite disconcerting, and we literally had to move out of it because it was disintegrating. So the project to build this building was a necessity. It cost £1.6 million to build, and as I've mentioned, it was designed by women for women. And you'll see now why it's called the Purple House and why our web address is purplehouse.co.uk. And you'll also notice that the colours are purple, green and white, which are the colours of suffrage, as I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience. But it makes a very clear statement that we are a feminist organisation, and we uphold feminist principles. So the problem, and I'm sure you'll recognise this, is that we've had 10% growth in demand over the last few years, and that's been a steady growth before you even take into account the significant spike in demand as a result of COVID. Women's services have been decimated nationally as a result of public funding cuts. And the light bulb moment that we had probably around 2005 was that we were running around the hamster wheel, trying to make short-term revenue funding, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year grants and contracts, address a long-term social need. As we all know, gender disadvantage has grown over thousands of years, and domestic abuse is deeply rooted in our society. And it doesn't matter if you had a completely blank check and as much money as you needed, a 3-year grant for revenue is never going to address that. So we realised that we needed to extend our planning horizon into thinking intergenerationally. So we needed to think in terms of 25 years and 50 years and 75 years. And that, along with the need that I talked about in terms of suitable housing for women, led us to think about, well, why don't we get our own properties? 25 years is the standard length of a mortgage. It makes sense to link up that long-term planning for services with a long-term financial strategy. And that really was the light bulb moment from which lots of different bits of thinking sprung. So our solution to that was, in the short term, to continue and taper off grants and contracts whilst that money is there. Of course, it's available to help us deliver services and benefit women. So why would we not continue with that? But in the long term, looking at sustainable income streams based on the lovely term sweating capital assets acquired through social investment. And that's currently through the acquisition lease of dispersed accommodation. This week we have 217, but we've got another 3 in conveyancing. So it'll be 220, largely 1 beds, 2 beds and 3 beds. But as I mentioned, we've got some 4s and 5s as well, generating safe housing plus the income revenue stream in perpetuity to fund our services. So we've got a range of different financial agreements, but where we have properties that are financed, the finance ranges between 15 years and 20 years, which of course feels like a long time at the beginning of it, but it soon goes by. And we're chipping away at those mortgages every month and building our capital asset base and building our balance sheet in our accounts. And part of the strategy is exploring social enterprise to deliver services. So I've talked about affordable justice. Our nursery also runs on a social enterprise basis and washes its own face financially. So we've got that mixture of grant, contract, social investment and social enterprise that all contributes to our long-term financial sustainability. So yes, I've used the term social investment before. It's also interchangeable with social finance. This is what it is. It's finance provided for voluntary and community sector organisations, which investors expect to both get back and to create social impact. And depending on the social investor, depends on the level of return that they want on their money. Some of them just want the money back that they've put in. Others expect the money back and a level of interest, which can vary. But for it to be considered social investment, it must also create social impact. So benefit to a defined group of beneficiaries. Social investment is also repayable. So it's repayable finance in some form to help the organisation achieve a social purpose. So I'll just let that percolate for a moment and pause again to see if there are any updated questions. Anything else that's come through in the last 10 minutes or so?
Yeah, there has. I'm just having a look through just to make sure I don't repeat myself or repeat Anna. Someone asked, could you give an overview of with all this activity, are you yet in what you would consider to be a sustainable financial position?
Absolutely, yeah. When we started off, 3% of our income was what you might call unrestricted. Now 83% of our finance is unrestricted and 17% is through grant and contract. So yes, we're financially sustainable.
Amazing. And Joe said, brilliant to hear a story of women running a place and services for women and growing it so organically, keeping close to roots and women's needs. So fab to hear of your success in offering such much needed support to victims and survivors. And Tamar said, again, in the earlier days before the organisation started generating money, what was your source of income? Did you have a different paid job? How did you balance your passion with income generation and family or time for yourself?
So for the first 6 years, I worked at the Women's Centre as a paid worker. And then in 2006, I recycled myself as a trustee when I took up a paid job in the NHS. And I still work in the NHS. I work for a clinical commissioning group, and I can hear the boos and hisses. So don't judge me too harshly for that. But what it has done is enabled me to understand a lot about statutory sector organisations and how finance works from that perspective, which also pushed me down a road of social investment and social enterprise, understanding how strapped commissioners are and how constrained they are in terms of their finance. In terms of work-life balance, yes, it's always a challenge. But for me, doing this work, I think, is energizing and invigorating and incredibly rewarding, not only from the point of view of being able to enable an organization to do the amazing things that our staff achieve, but also in terms of being able to do things like this and share that experience with other organisations who hopefully will pick up some tips and hints and be able to enable themselves to be financially sustainable and therefore help women all over the country. So that in itself is sustaining. And actually, one of the unintended consequences of taking this approach was that although it's no less hard work, working for yourself and working for a future and knowing it's not just a stopgap for the next 2 years grant absolutely changes the feel of the organisation. That positivity, that sense of empowerment and can do is really motivating and what's the word, energizing for everybody in the organization, volunteers, staff, trustees. It lifts the gloom, and therefore we've all got a sense of working towards a common purpose in a really positive way that's building for the future. So I'll stop there before I get too evangelical, but yes.
And that's amazing. And there's another question. For the business to get its first mortgage, did it matter if the trustee had any mortgage at that time?
No, because any finance that's associated with the organisation goes on the track record of the organisation. So none of the repayable finance that we've got is dependent on or is linked to the individual financial circumstances of the trustees or the directors.
Yeah,
They're very separate.
Yeah. And is the rent that you ask for in line with the rental market value or based on housing benefit? And is there a limit on how long women can live in your properties, i.e. is it temporary accommodation?
So the rent we charge is something called exempt accommodation rental rates. So it's not linked to market values and it's not actually linked to local housing allowance. It's constructed on the basis of the cost of running the properties in relation to things like repairs, maintenance, insurance, the bricks and mortar costs, but also the cost of the additional support that's provided. So if there's anyone in the audience that runs refuges, you'll know that the rent that you charge is exempt accommodation rates, or sometimes it's called intensive housing management rental rates. So it's constructed very differently. And in terms of the length of the tenancies, we don't place any limit on how long a woman can stay in one of our properties. We have a small number which we class as temporary accommodation, but that's to meet a specific need that's arisen over the years. But most of our tenants are on assured short hold tenancies. And as I say, there's no limit to the tenancy. What there can sometimes be is a limit to the period of intensive support that's available to that tenant, and that's dependent on the housing benefit arrangement. But that suits us and suits us in terms of our empowerment model, because we don't want women to be dependent on intensive support for the rest of their lives. So once they are ready, we simply move them on to what's called general needs tenancies. Clearly there's a continued contact with them, but we don't provide ongoing intensive support, and the rent amount changes to reflect that.
Okay. And social investment rates. Someone said they didn't think they were that competitive. What is the benefit over a traditional mortgage?
The benefit over a traditional mortgage is often that the terms and conditions associated with that loan. So even though the interest rate might be slightly higher than what you would get on the commercial market, the ability to access commercial finance is different. And sometimes the conditions that you have to meet are more stringent than with social investment. So you have to look at each arrangement in the round to make a decision for yourself as to whether it's the right deal for you at the right time. The other thing I would say is that the social investment market is relatively small. All of the social investors know each other and compete with each other. So it's very possible to have a conversation with one, go to another and say, actually, I'm getting a better deal across the street. Can you offer me something better? And to haggle and comparison shop. So yeah, there's no one standard in terms of interest rates and terms and conditions. It's all negotiable. And that's where being strong, confident, assertive women is really an advantage, because you can often go to a social investor and say, this is what I want, can you offer it? And they will often say, ask you a few questions and say, well, actually, yes, we can, because they want to make a deal.
Okay, and just finally for this question time, do you think it's worth paying fee to bid writers or advisors for large contracts?
Well, that's, yeah, we never have, is what I would say. And I think the main reason for me is that however good somebody might be at writing a bid, they will never know your organisation as well as you do. And in my experience over the years, what grant funders are interested in is the ability to explain the need and the commitment that shines through from the page from an organisation that's written its own bid. And you can, you know, with my other hat on, you can really tell if someone has paid a bid writer, because the language tends to be dry and matter of fact, and the passion just doesn't come through. So
I'll just chip in there, Lisa. I would second that as someone who's read quite a lot of funding applications. But I would also say that in very, very tiny organisations where people are absolutely at capacity, and I know everyone on this webinar will have worked for one of those organisations at some point or is currently doing so, sometimes you just have to pay people a bit extra to do that bit of extra work. So there might be someone that isn't necessarily a staff member, but knows you really well and believes in everything you do, that you kind of pay as a, you know, almost as a freelancer to help put the bid together. But it really matters that they are of your organisation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I shall carry on through the slides. So why is social investment important? We talked about it being an alternative to grant and contract funding. The asset-backed investment, so where you have something that's tangible like property, it helps to grow your balance sheet and bring you financial sustainability. It's a really direct route to scaling up. So you can buy more and do more with social investment than you can sort of putting things together very slowly through grant. And one of the amazing things is it helps increase your autonomy over service development. If you've got your own money and you spot a need, you can apply that money to meet that need immediately, rather than having to form a rationale, an argument, find the right grant funder, go through whatever their process is, and wait months to years to get that service up and running. I think one of the things also just occurred to me to mention here is that we were worried at certain points that having our own assets would make us less attractive to grant funders. But in actual fact, we needn't have worried, because the opposite's been true. Grant funders like the fact that we have financial sustainability, because it means we're not going to go pop in the next couple of years. And they know that the money they're investing with you in terms of generating a service will likely deliver benefit beyond the life of the grant. So we haven't found it to be a disadvantage. So some of the questions that you might want to consider for yourselves is how much longer you think your local authority or grant income will last or support safe service delivery. What we're seeing is that in a lot of areas, local authority funding has been cut so significantly that it's difficult, if not impossible, to have safe levels of staffing to deliver services such as domestic abuse support. And that may be an issue for you in your area as well. Generally, what do you think about the idea of acquiring property? Is that something that fits in with your service offer? Could you make it work? You know, there's a lot involved, but the benefits are many. You already own assets which you could use to attract loan investment. Could you realise some of the money that's tied up in an asset that you already have? How might your board or trustees view taking on loan or using social enterprise? Certainly at the very beginning, ours were apprehensive about it. You know, I mentioned our first investment was a £500,000 loan. Well, some of our trustees had never had credit, had never had a personal loan, had never had a mortgage. So the idea of being £500,000 in debt was incredibly daunting. And it could well be that some of your board or trustees would be in a similar position. Equally, there could be some that think, yes, this is great. Why haven't we been doing it for the last 5 years? So, you know, it's likely that there'll be a mixture of views and risk appetites across your board. And how would you manage that? What do you perceive as the risks? Sometimes people have a gut reaction to loan as risky. But what I would say is, how risky is it continuing to operate when you have no certainty about the next financial year's grant? And actually, if you've got something that's loan financed, as long as you've got a reasonable income stream to service the loan, it's much less risky than relying on short to medium term grants. And lastly, have you got the right legal entity or entities to achieve what you want? Do you have, for instance, the power in your constitution or memorandum and articles of association to take on loan, to trade? What does your memonarts look like? And is there anything that you need to do to alter that? And we have a number of different legal entities. We had to set up a different company, for example, to run our law firm, but it's still within our group. So lots of very big questions there, but things that you might want to ask yourself in relation to embarking on a journey like this. And yes, I mentioned we have different entities. At the moment, we actually have 6 companies in our group. It hasn't always been like that, but we've added a couple of new ones in the last 18 months. So we have our overarching charity. Winner Trading Limited is our registered social landlord or housing association, holds a contract for the local authority. Its surplus gets fed into the charity. We also have Whole Women's Network, which is a legacy organisation, but holds a lot of our assets as well. And we tend to focus our loan investment in Whole Women's Network to hold it there. I've mentioned Affordable Justice, our law firm. We floated off our nurseries as a separate charity in the last 18 months. And about a year ago, we acquired a community interest company called Host, which develops outcomes and online performance measurement frameworks for recovery journeys. And sometimes that's through health, and sometimes that's for things like domestic abuse. So there's a whole load of information and relevant steps for consideration in terms of your legal entities. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that you go from 1 to 6. That's happened over the last 20 years, but you might want to start off considering one subsidiary to do something around property, and just to hold that operational and strategic thinking in a slightly different place to your overarching charity, and to feed your charity and give it that unrestricted income. So yes, I'll just pause there for a moment and see if there are any more questions at this point.
I actually think I might be able to reveal everybody's video now. Well, okay. It gives them the option. So I think if I go to here, allow panelists to start video. So I think it means, everybody, that if you want, hopefully by clicking this button, it means that if you want, you can start your video, but obviously you don't have to, you can stay as you are.
Okay.
And actually the screen is mainly taken up with the presentation, isn't it? So
yeah,
not make much difference. Lisa, there are tons of questions and lots of people just being really positive. And I think probably lots of people wishing you were on their board. So somebody's asked, as a trustee with a full-time job, how often do you engage with the organisation?
Probably 2 or 3 times a week. I'm the treasurer. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So I link in with the finance team quite often. And then there's management committee once a month and a couple of subcommittees. So yeah, I'd say 2 or 3 times a week, and probably somewhere between 8 and 10 hours time commitment. But I choose to do that. And I talked earlier about it being energizing and invigorating. Certainly doesn't feel like a chore, but I appreciate not every trustee has that amount of time to offer.
Ask a question.
So is it okay if we do the questions in the chat, just because we've got so many women on this webinar? I think it might be really difficult for us to manage if people are speaking. So if you, I know it's not ideal, but if you're able to mute yourself and put your question in the chat, that would be brilliant. I'm just going to work through them now. So someone's saying you've done a really great analysis of when social investment can be useful. Is the model here that the rent you receive from from various different sources enables you to pay back the loan with a bit left over?
Yes, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then someone else asking, what assets can be acquired that aren't property, where property is less relevant?
So if, for example, and this may not apply in this context, but organisations that offer community transport might acquire a fleet of vehicles, or you anything really that enables the organisation to deliver its services that isn't revenue based. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably need a little bit more context of that organisation to comment.
We've lost Lisa now, and I wonder if that's because everyone switched their video on.
I can see her. I can see Lisa fine.
Yeah, I am still here. Can you hear me?
Okay, it must be. It's probably me.
I think it might be your internet.
Yeah, I think it must be my internet that froze. Actually, yeah. I know this is really annoying, but could people switch their videos off? Because otherwise, I think we're going to have problems with internet.
I don't think
Not the hosts, but everyone else. Sorry to go back on that. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, if there's one more burning question,
there's quite a few questions, Lisa.
Yeah.
Sorry, you keep going.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of the time. We've still got quite a bit to get through. So we'll just see if we can manage that as we go along. I don't want people to miss out on the content, but hopefully we'll still have time for questions as we go along. So in terms of how we've made it happen, again, over a period of time, we got 3 tranches of empty homes capital grants totaling £1 million between 2012 and 2015, and we matched that with just under £1 million of loan through Unity Trust Bank. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the Empty Homes programme took properties that had been empty for more than 6 months to bring them back into use for social housing, and there was grant available to acquire and refurbish those properties. And because we had more than half of that money in grant fund. We got a really good deal through Unity Trust Bank for that loan finance that enabled us effectively to double our money. And between 2012 and 2015, we acquired 56 additional properties, which was quite exhausting, but well worth doing in the long run. We optimised our rent through our registered social landlord status in our trading arm, which helped us to get the exempt accommodation rental rates. And we're generating between 220 and 250k annual sustainable surplus through that particular property portfolio. And we've bolted on additional property related income streams by offering a service to private landlords whereby they lease us their properties. We passport through a proportion of the rent, but we keep the bit that's associated with delivering the support, and we charge a property management fee in the same way as an estate agent would. And what that enables us to do is to grow the number of properties that we have available to us, but without having that capital outlay. So yeah, just a few before and after shots. This was one of the worst empty homes that we did up, and as you can see, it was in a really poor state when we acquired it. In fact, this particular one was due for demolition, but we used our grant funding to refurbish it, and that's what it looked like after the refurb. A really good quality home that any woman would be pleased to live in, and actually makes a really strong statement that you deserve this type of property. You deserve a property that looks brand new and is ready to move into, which helps in terms of that recovery process. So some of the social investment that we've used, we've worked extensively with social and sustainable capital, and we took £2 million in 2017 to buy 35 more properties. This particular loan product we helped to co-design. So I was saying earlier about being confident. Sask offered us one of their standard deals, and we said, actually, it don't really work for us. How about this? And basically it's 100% finance, so it covers all of the costs of purchasing those properties and a worker. It's an interest only deal over 10 years, so we don't pay back the capital in the first 10 years, but we have an option to buy in year 10 at the price we paid in year 1. So all the benefit of the capital growth comes to us. There's no fixed interest rate. The investor return is the net surplus after all the bills are paid, so repairs, maintenance, insurance, property management. So the risk to us financially is zero. We don't have to provide any cash up front. No need to find the 30% deposit, which you would need for standard loan finance. No revenue risk. And it was designed around us. Again, from us being bold and, dare I say it, gobby, and saying, no, this is what we want, can you do it? And they went away into a darkened room, scratched their heads, and this is the deal they came back with. And yeah, we got 35 more safe homes for women as a result. And based on that, Sask developed the Social and Sustainable Housing Fund, the SASH Fund, which started off with £26 million and has grown, and is essentially that deal that I've described with a few modifications, and that launched in 2019. And something that, you know, organisations on this call might be interested in, one of the pieces of work we're engaged in at the moment is with the Women in Safe Homes Fund. Sorry, this is these slides have a mind of their own.
Lisa, a couple of people have put in the chat that the slides seem stuck and that they're suddenly not able to see them.
Oh, right, okay.
I'm not sure.
Well, these particular slides.
Rosa, is there anything that we can do to try and fix that? Lots of people have also said that they're working for them, so maybe it's just people having,
might be individuals, yeah,
you know, the bandwidth not being quite big enough.
Yeah, because
okay.
it seems to be okay.
Yeah, which is happening at my end as well.
Okay. Well, I'll carry on.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for people that that's not working for.
Yeah. So the Wish Fund is there to provide safe housing to vulnerable women that might be as a result of domestic abuse, women at risk of offending, women who are otherwise homeless, but also to create a step change in the sector by enabling grassroots women's organisations to generate an income to manage leased property, subsequently to purchase their property and therefore increase their financial resilience. And actually the Wish Fund is a stepping stone, and what it does is it enables an organisation to cut their teeth on managing dispersed accommodation and develop a track record to enable them to get loan finance to purchase property 3 or 4 years into the arrangement. This is a really busy slide, and you'll all have these slides, but essentially it describes the arrangement whereby the investment fund, sorry, these slides keep doing this. The investment fund in this instance owns the property, leases it to Winner Trading, which is our registered social landlord, and Winner Trading has a management agreement with local women's sector organisations to share that management responsibility for those properties. The local WSO does all the work with the women, but the tenancy agreement is between Winner Trading and the women in the homes, and it's a supported process so that Winner Trading supports local organisations to learn how to manage property if they've not done it before, and get themselves into a position where they can do it for themselves. And we've actually established a new form of lease, which we've called the midwife lease, that aptly describes what Winner is doing. We're helping to give birth to lots of local women's organisations who have that capability and capacity to lease and manage and buy later the properties. And if anyone's interested in learning more specifically about that, quite happy to have individual follow-up calls with women about it. And this just describes what's in it for everyone. You would get much needed move on accommodation for women, and income streams to pay for those costs, supported entry into managing property, and opening the door to other forms of grants or investment for housing. We get an opportunity to extend our feminist approach to housing provision, and we get some income stream by providing that support. And the Wish Fund moves into new markets and develops its social investment. I'll skip over this one because this is more of a detail of how it will work, but again, you can have a look at it when you get the slides. So that's social investment and how we've interpreted it. Is there anything burning that we need to cover before we look at social enterprise?
I don't think there is. There have been lots of questions about kind of follow-on support, so I think that's something for us to think about, Lisa, how we can how we can follow up lots of these questions and people's desire for more information. But I don't think any of the questions relate specifically to social investment.
Okay. So thinking about social enterprise then, an organisation that applies commercial strategies to maximise improvements in its financial, social and environmental well-being, including maximising social impact. So basically, it's running a community business that delivers social benefit. And it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. I've mentioned affordable justice. We are a company limited by guarantee and a registered charity, authorised and regulated by the Solicitors Registration Authority. So it operates like a commercial law firm in that respect, but our charges to clients are less than a third of what they would pay on the high street, which brings that legal advice and representation much more accessible to women who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it and would be left in awful situations, exposed to a lot of safety risk, which was what we were finding when we looked at setting this up. For us, it's financially sustainable, self-sufficient service, helps the centre's client group. We don't make a profit from affordable justice. We wanted to keep the charges as low as possible. So it's done on a break-even business model. You could increase the charges and make it profitable, but we wanted to keep it as accessible as possible. But again, one of the unforeseen benefits is we've got 2 specialist lawyers on site, which is incredibly useful for our domestic abuse team, who can just pop down the corridor and say, "Oh, Sue, I've got this situation. What could we do?" And that's been enormously helpful to all of our domestic abuse clients as well. So again, going back to that idea of the integrated service model and having a range of services under one roof. That's just a few snaps of us. That's when we launched, and we won a Startup of the Year in 2016 as a social enterprise. Generally speaking, some of the recognition of our work, we do put in for things like awards, not because we're egotists, but because what it does is it raises the profile of this way of working, and it raises the profile more generally of women tackling gender disadvantage and women offering services for women, and just gets domestic abuse on the agenda in a different way. So that's our thinking behind some of these awards. And as you can see, we've been pretty successful in a number of them. We want quality to thread through what we do. So we've got various different quality badges. Some of those I'm sure you'll recognise. And we maintain those all of the time. One of the things that's come about over the last couple of years is the Surviving and Thriving Network. And it's a network of women's sector organisations with an interest in social investment and social enterprise. We meet 2 or 3 times a year. At the moment, that's online. It's funded by Lloyds Foundation, which means that when we can meet face to face, all the expenses are paid, and that's travel, but also overnight accommodation, where getting to and from a place in one day isn't feasible. The agenda is set by the network members, and we use the opportunity to share skills and information. And that network is open to any woman or any organisation on this call today. We've got a meeting coming up, I think at the beginning of February, and we're just updating on some of the property work, and I think one of the topics is around women with no recourse. So we set the agenda for the next meeting at the preceding meeting, and Winner simply facilitates this, but it has been very positive and productive thus far, and it's free. So this is the message I want to leave you with. It can be done. You can lift more than your own body weight, believe it or not, and achieve some amazing things simply by being determined and having that can-do approach. And yes, this little ant has lifted a log, and you can all do that as well. So that's the end of the slides. I think we've got a little bit more time for Q&A if there are some that people wanted to focus on.
Rosa, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, I'm just checking where we left off.
So I think the first one is, I'll read the first one and then you go from there. Is there a minimum number of properties that makes this viable?
Yes, 30. And it's very specific. We started off with 10, and you know, you get as much aggravation from 2 properties as you do from 20 or 30 properties. But the reason why 30 is our minimum is that generates an amount of income that allows you to pay for essentially 2 members of staff and running costs, and put in the relevant amount of infrastructure to make that work effectively.
I think as well, we might have missed this question, which was further up. It was really great analysis of when social investment can be useful. Is the model here that the rent you receive, is this from housing benefit, enables you to pay back the loan with a bit left over? Did we read that one out?
We did, yes, and the answer is yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing. Yep.
Could you say a bit more about how you manage the different parts of the business group?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I showed you that slide which had 6 different organisations, all operating as one. So each of those organisations has a small board, and when I say small, I mean small. It's between 3 and 6 for each organisation. I know in times gone by it's been fashionable to have 12 and 15 people on a board, but that's quite unwieldy. So we have small boards, but what we do is that we ensure that those boards meet up periodically through the year, usually 2 or 3 times a year. And very specifically in January, we all have a shared planning day where we look at what are the priorities for all the organisation for that forthcoming year. So what that does is it enables us all to carry on working in a shared direction. And we come up with a list of projects that are ongoing and new for that particular year for each of the boards to focus on. And that's how we keep it all rolling in the same direction.
And
I've had one question that I think might have come directly to me rather than to the whole chat, which was, at one point in the journey, do you recommend setting up a trading subsidiary, i.e. if we're starting out selling training and it's still quite small scale, is it okay for this to be kept in-house and part of the charity as it links to our activities and is referred to in our governing document, or is there a reason why an independent entity is beneficial right away?
I think if the activity is selling training, then you're probably okay to keep it in-house, as it were, for a period of time. I think when it starts to grow in volume, you might want to consider constituting it separately, partly because there are some regulations to do with charities that limit the amount of trading income that you can have in-house. So if you're starting to get near that threshold, you might want to consider it differently. And partly because if that operation grows significantly, you might want to have a focused board or group of trustees working on it to keep it operating effectively. And certainly that's what we found with our trading arm, that particular board focuses on things like reporting and regulatory requirements for Homes England, which is the regulatory body, and all of the operational stuff that comes with running property, everything from do we allow pets to reviewing our tenancy agreement periodically, and actually just managing the workload is a consideration.
And then linked to the kind of training question, there's a few questions about do you sorry, there are so many questions, we're struggling to keep on top of them, aren't we? Do you is the training that you provide free for tenants and charged to external people?
It is free for tenants and service users. Sometimes it's funded through contracts, but our training officer, who delivers most of our training, is funded through our unrestricted income. So yeah, it's free at the point of delivery, but there is a cost. As I mentioned, sometimes we've had bits of funding over the years, but we see it as an integrated part of our service delivery, and therefore it's an essential thing that we want to fund and maintain.
And Rosie, you go.
With regards to the legal arm, do you pay the solicitors competitive salaries?
Well, no, actually, we pay them above market salaries because we want the best, and we have got the best. And we constructed our business model with that principle in mind. There are a number of law centres, for example, that have quite low salaries for solicitors, but we didn't want that. We didn't want women who work for us to have to take a hit to their income simply because they work for a charity. So we built the business model around more than competitive salaries, and as a result we have a very stable, high quality legal team.
Great. And there was a question, could you give more information on how to contact and who for the Surviving and Thriving network?
Yes, I can stick that in the chat actually. It's one of our staff members. I'll see if I can multitask. To everyone. Okay, I'm just going to put Jade's email address in here, and I will warn her that she might get a number of emails. So it's jade.joyce@purplehouse.co.uk for the Surviving and Thriving network.
Thank you very much. And do you use specialist processes, programs to generate supporting data for analysis and reporting?
One of the things that really underpins what we do is always looking for developments in how we use digital technology. So we use some software to help manage our property portfolio that's fully integrated with our accounts package. So we use an accounts package called Xero, Xero, for managing our money, and that's fully integrated with Released, which is our property management system. and that saves us an awful lot of time administratively, and also provides us with all sorts of reporting that helps us to keep track of what we're doing and performance and so on. And more generally, we use digital whenever we can. So in the last year, we have moved to using a program called DocuSign, which helps us to get tenancy agreements signed electronically where that is suitable for women. And again, saves a lot of time and energy just traveling around the city and getting hard copies signed and all of that sort of thing. So the short answer is yes, digital where possible.
And there are a lot of questions about whether you mentor smaller organisations and how people can talk to you about specific questions. So I think the job for us is to go back through this chat and see what the asks are and kind of have a bit of a think about how we can best support people to continue this thinking. Because I'm really conscious that you probably can't have 57 phone calls with all of the, all the women on this webinar. So we need to work out how we can do that, because it would be, there's clearly so much enthusiasm and energy out there. I really want to harness that and to help organisations take it forward.
Yeah, I'm putting my email address in the chat. I'm happy for anybody to email me with specific queries. May not be able to answer immediately, but I will get back to everybody who sends a question.
That's so generous, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah. There was a question that I think we missed, and it might be, I think it's relevant to the conversation you were having earlier about the minimum number of properties.
Yeah.
And someone said, do you think the same surplus can be achieved in a smaller population? Now, I'm not sure I completely understand that question, but that might be.
Is that it depends on whether that's a population of a town or a city.
I think it's probably in a smaller location, like a smaller town.
Probably is the answer to that, but again, it's about looking at the local need and demand, and tailoring a model that meets that need and demand.
And then there's quite a few questions around training, and I think that's probably because I imagine there are lots of organisations who deliver training and are considering charging for that training as a way of bringing in income. And I think lots of the questions, a few questions asking, do you charge for the training? And I think you've clarified that you don't.
No, we don't charge service users at all. If a specific agency wanted a specific bit of training that we had to design, then yes, we would charge for it, but that's a very tiny amount of the training that we do.
And do you train other organisations, other service delivery organisations? Or would you charge them?
Yes and no is the answer to that. We participate in a local forum around domestic abuse and safeguarding training, and we offer staff time to help deliver training to multi-agency audiences, and we do that as part of our service offer. Again, if a specific agency approached us and wanted training for their particular staff, we would do that, but we have very rarely had those sorts of requests over the years. I can think of 2. Okay. So I'm not sure we would make a sustainable living out of that.
That's really helpful to know. There's one more question that I'm going to share with you, and then I'm really conscious that we've come up to our kind of time. but obviously you've left your email address if there are any other specific questions. So what would you say about buying a property to rent out to different organisations offering support? So rather than residential property, we could use part of it but rent out to others as well as an income stream.
Sure, yeah. The issue about commercial property, I think, has changed over the last year due to COVID. I suspect that there are fewer organisations looking for that sort of space. But again, if you either owned an asset or could buy an asset and fill it with sufficient rent-paying organisations, why wouldn't you?
Okay, so I'm just replying to someone. That's brilliant. I think probably, given that we're nearly at 12 o'clock, we should take this opportunity to say thank you very much. And
Pleasure.
that's a thank you to Lisa for sharing a really, really inspiring story with us. And I'm feeling inspired, but I don't know if this is mirrored by other people on the call, but also slightly overwhelmed by how much there is to be done. And it's really amazing seeing all these opportunities that I hadn't quite realised were there. And it's exciting, but also a whole new world to explore and find out about. And so thank you so much for so generously sharing all of that with us, and for so generously offering follow-up support as well. Lisa and I will talk about how we can kind of take this further, because there is so much more to be done. And thank you to everyone for joining us. You know, I think this is the highest numbers we've ever had on a webinar at Rosa. And people have been really committed and engaged, and taken part in the chat, and I hope we got all the questions, but there may be some we've missed. And thank you for all those little comments that are coming into the chat now saying thank you and what a brilliant session. So it feels really uplifting, which is what we all need right now. So thank you, Lisa. We'll say goodbye now, and hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Rosa and Anna, is there a way that we can download the chat and the comments so I can just read through them when I've got a little bit more time? Is that okay?
Yeah, and I think there might be some we've missed, so that would be great. Rosa, could you do that, please? Yeah.
Can we do that? Oh yeah, I can save chat.
Yeah. And Lisa, I might just give you a ring now if that's all right, and we could just have a quick chat.
Yeah, that's fine. I've got another session, another meeting, but I can be a few minutes late for it. So yeah, let's do it while it's fresh in our minds.
Okay, all right.
All right. Okay,
I'm going to end it now. Okay. Bye.
Okay, cheers.
Bye.